Betrayal is a word that should never be used in the same sentence with cartels, because it is the one thing drug lords and kingpins can never ever forgive. Every cartel head has a unique way of running their business, as well as punishing offenders, but when it comes to El Mencho, everyone knows that his method of handling things is much more unique and deadly. El Mencho is not one to take no for an answer. If he asks you to work for him, you can either say yes or kiss your life goodbye. Which is why when El Cholo decided to betray his boss El Mencho, his fate was signed and sealed. If he had a choice, El Cholo would probably have chosen a straight bullet to the head over the kind of pain and torture he faced at the hand of El Mencho and the CJNG. Before we talk about El Cholo's betrayal, capture, confession, and excruciating death, let's talk a little about El Mencho and his brutal criminal organization, the CJNG. New Jalisco Generation Cartel, popularly known as the CJNG, was formed in 2010 and is led by Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho. The group used their military knowledge and ability to use violence and brutality to their advantage. Within a short time, they became the most feared cartel in Mexico. Anyone who knows about the CJNG and their mode of operations knows that only a person who no longer values his life would dare go against them. Their leader, El Mencho, has often been described as the devil himself. If you think that's over-exaggerated, try asking about the leader of the most brutal cartel in Mexico and watch how quickly fingers will point to El Mencho and his evil ways. So why would El Cholo betray a man with such reputation? Hold on, we'll get there. El Mencho's organization is known for numerous murders, drug trafficking, and crude oil theft. He and the CJNG have committed horrendous crimes that would literally put known terrorists in a state of perpetual fear and terror. The worst part about the crimes they commit is that they seem to enjoy the public audience, so they make it a point of duty to film everything they do. The CJNG has a relatively small population, but they've pulled more weights than the largest cartel in Mexico, the Sinaloa Cartel. In 2020, the government affirmed that the CJNG was the most dangerous criminal organization in Mexico. They are the first cartel to have a fallout with the government and practically win. They also have a record of being the first cartel to bring down a military helicopter.
Used rocket-propelled grenades last Friday to bring down this army helicopter, killing 6 soldiers.
Using a rocket-propelled grenade. You should know that the brutality of this group isn't just directed at the government. The CJNG exerts the same energy on victims, civilians, and basically anyone who makes the mistake of crossing paths with them. Their modus operandi includes hanging dead bodies of their victims and rival cartel members from bridges. There are rumors that the CJNG recruits use victims' bodies to practice cannibalism during their initiation process. Whether they are elderly or young, the CJNG cartel has no regard for lives. As a result, they have assassinated so many government officials, including the former governor of Jalisco, Aristotle Sandoval. As you have probably already figured out, all these assassinations, terror, chaos, and bloodshed are sanctioned by El Mencho. After assuming leadership of such a dangerous cartel, El Mencho quickly became an epitome of cruelty. He was born into poverty, and so he had nothing but his determination to make it big in the drug business. That determination got him to where he wanted, at the top of a criminal organization. During his early days in the business, El Mencho was a sicario for the Milenio Cartel, and that's where he met El Cholo. The pair worked as members of the protective detail assigned to the drug lord Armando Valencia Cornelio, aka El Maradona. When the Milenio Cartel started to fall, El Mencho tried his best to take advantage of the situation. The bosses who exceeded him in rank were either arrested or killed, so he tried to assume leadership. By this time, El Cholo and El Mencho had become close friends. After the demise of their bosses, El Cholo was there when El Mencho reorganized the part of the cartel that was loyal to him and changed its name to the new General Jalisco Cartel. As the leader of the cartel, El Mencho made sure everyone knew their place and followed instructions. He led the CJNG to begin a massive, brutal movement and began the most dangerous era of violence Mexico would witness. Coming from a poor background, El Mencho wanted to get his hands on as much money as he could get, but he was also a disciplined man. He started by using heavy violence to take down members of rival cartels. Through this means, he instilled fear in the hearts of many cartels except one, the Sinaloa Cartel. Granted, CJNG had the military force, but they were few, much fewer than the Sinaloa cartel, the biggest cartel in Mexico, that had already been established long before the CJNG came into the game. While other cartels were accustomed to committing murder and going through difficult lengths to hide the dead bodies, El Mencho developed a counter method to solve the problem of finding hiding spots for bodies. For a time, a man known as the Stew Maker helped the CJNG cartel with this problem by using acids to dissolve the bodies of victims. Other times, El Mencho and the CJNG would cut the bodies into smaller bits and scatter them in public places. They would make videos of the whole process and post on social media to show the people what they were capable of. For quite a while, El Cholo was a kind of right-hand man to El Mencho. He was the one who assassinated people for him. Thanks to his important role, El Cholo had first-hand knowledge of El Mencho's evil capacity. El Cholo became El Mencho's personal sicario in 2011, and as bizarre as it sounds, his closeness to the boss was probably the reason for his betrayal. Along the line, El Cholo must have gotten tired of taking orders from his boss and wanted something for himself, so he began to lose perspective. The thoughts of rebellion filled him so much, he forgot that anyone who rebelled was liable to death by the general law binding cartels. It didn't take long for El Cholo to begin doing things that he knew would be an offense to his boss. He even went as far as carrying out robberies and hits that weren't ordered by El Mencho. News of El Cholo's unsanctioned hits soon got into the ears of El Mencho from the cartel's financial operator, Marcos Hernandez. El Mencho was of course infuriated by El Cholo's actions, but there might have been a chance that El Mencho would have considered their long-term friendship and given El Cholo a second chance if only he had apologized. Unfortunately for him, El Cholo was too far down the path of rebellion. Not only did he refuse to apologize, he went on to murder Marcos and declare war on his former boss. El Cholo made no effort to salvage the situation. Instead, he broke out, taking some members of CJNG to form his own cartel, the Nueve Plaza Cartel. El Cholo's act of betrayal left CJNG with less manpower. What's worse, CJNG's head of logistics, Eric Valencia Salazar, followed El Cholo. As expected, El Mencho took immediate actions against El Cholo and all those that left with him. He sent out a group of sicarios to hunt and murder them so that their new-formed cartel would not stand. Unfortunately for Mencho, these men were people who had worked closely with him, so they knew all his strategies and could easily escape any traps that were set for them. El Cholo had no fear whatsoever. The men El Mencho sent to assassinate him failed woefully. El Cholo retaliated by killing the leader of the hit squad. This only fanned the fire of war between his former boss and him. El Cholo was ready for battle, but somewhere in his mind he knew he didn't have the capacity to take on El Mencho. So he made friends with the enemy of his enemy, the Sinaloa cartel. Upon making contact with El Cholo, the Sinaloa cartel couldn't wait to accept his alliance because they had already been looking for an opportunity to bring down the CJNG. El Cholo was the best way to achieve that. To achieve their shared goal, the Sinaloa cartel supplied El Cholo all the resources he needed to fight against the CJNG on their terms. The Sinaloa cartel started using the Nueve cartel as mercenaries to take out their targets. To appease him, the Sinaloa cartel also gave El Cholo the clearance to take over some important sections of the Jalisco territory. El Cholo seemed to have the upper hand against Mencho, but as the saying goes, when two elephants fight, the grass suffers. The residents of Guadalajara were on the receiving end of the war between El Cholo and El Mencho. In 2018, 3 students in Guadalajara were on their way home from school when members of the CJNG kidnapped and killed them all because they thought the students were members of the Nueva cartel. The people of Guadalajara were plagued with fear and dead bodies on the streets. As the war raged on, the odds turned against El Cholo just when he thought he had won and was totally free from the controlling arms of his former boss. On March 18, 2021, El Cholo's fate changed in the worst direction. He was captured by El Mencho's men and brought him to his knees. Remember, the CJNG enjoys making videos, so they made a video in which El Cholo is seen calmly seated with gunmen surrounding him. In his confession, he said, "My name is Carlos Enrique Sánchez Martinez, aka El Cholo. I am originally from Guadalajara, Jalisco. I am here because I am an enemy of CJNG. I met with Omar Garcia Harfuk in the federal district so that he could give me his backing. This is due to us both being after the CJNG, and he did give me his full support, but he told me that he needed something relevant in return so that I could operate with his support and his people among the city. While El Cholo was trying to implicate Omar Garcia in that video, he had a message for his other supporters. El Cholo's confession ended with him saying, "Anyone that is still left supporting me is best for your own good to just start taking care of your families so that you don't end up like me." It is pretty obvious that his confession was scripted by the CJNG, and they added the warning that was received properly. All the people El Cholo mentioned in his confession began making statements to prove their innocence. Omar Garcia took to Twitter to say, "I reiterate that I will not be distracted by false messages from criminals. My commitment to society is a firm fight against crime." When El Cholo fell, he pulled all his associates down with him. All the public law officers that were named in his confession lost their jobs almost immediately. After the release of the confession video, the CJNG went on to torture El Cholo till death saved him from them. He was brutally tortured for 2 days. They started by shattering his legs. All the bones there were broken and crushed into small pieces. Then his toes were chopped into bits. When El Cholo's body was found, it was very visible that he had passed through so much. He was so battered that it was difficult to know the actual cause of death. He was obviously electrocuted, and his tongue was attached to a clamp that was used to yank it out of his mouth. There were 2 gunshots to his head, and his eyes were gouged out. His ribs were broken, and his body was slashed before being wrapped in a plastic bag and dumped on a public bench. Of course, the CJNG wouldn't have done it any other way. Surprisingly, the Sinaloa cartel neither did nor said anything about El Cholo's death. What about the Nueva Cartel? They responded the same way the Sinaloa cartel did. El Mencho had won. He won in such a way that no one had the courage to challenge him. El Cholo chose his path when he betrayed El Mencho, and he got the wages of betrayal, which is humiliating death. That's all on our video today. See you in the next one.